What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video, as you can no doubt tell, is focused on probably an old, forgotten type hero, because realistically Faye is, I believe, from 2017, so this resplendent was recently given to all you Fed passers, but you can always treat this video as a Faye analysis in general. So we're going to do quite a bit of due diligence throughout this video to talk about Faye, builds, comparisons, and whether she's worth investing into in the 2022 Fire Emblem Heroes State of the Game. Even if you're not a Faye enthusiast, this video might enlighten you in one way or another to come to an opinion or judgment about Faye. So to begin off this video, as I've done in quite a few ones in the past, I'd like to mention how this channel still functions even to this day after almost 5 years of content. It's because of those of you that choose to support the content, and many of you do, so I do appreciate it. Even for those of you that do not directly contribute through something like Patreon, sign up through coaching, visit me on Twitch, whatever it means, every little bit helps and does make a difference. And I have to make sure I mention it at the beginning of these videos as a reminder of how grateful, but also how to keep this type of content going in the long term. And that's through those of you that choose to support what I do. So again, thank you. You see the end screen with the names of those that do that. Some benefits of doing so as a means of me giving back is stuff like monthly unit reviews, access to Discord where you pretty much get immediate help to any sort of questions, and some more behind the scenes weekly podcast type stuff. So nothing else, maybe check out the Patreon, and if it has some interest in you or you love what I do, maybe this is a way to get something back. On top of that, for those of you that want to make it more personal, I do offer coaching on Metafy, so maybe go check that out if you really want to take your Fed level to the next game. I've helped many through this, and people have gone from never touching Aether Raids all the way up to the top tiers. Recently, I've had a interest in stuff like Summoner Duels, as someone who consistently makes top 100 in SDR, of course F2P, and in SDS rank 1. There is a lot for me to give you guys, and for those of you that especially have limited barracks. Despite what you might think and all the years that I've played, my barracks isn't really all too great. It's good, but it's not amazing. Others have stuff like Yuri. I don't have Yuri. Some of you might have Brave Erica. I don't have Brave Erica. This is just the most prominent examples I see comparing my barracks to a lot of other players, and just being able to use what you have and maximizing the value of your barracks, you'll get a lot out of these sort of coaching sessions if you wanted to make it more personal but still contribute to the channel's growth and potential in the long term. Either way, this is a video for that, as with all these other ones that I try to cover. But with that being said, if you don't want to or you just cannot, I understand, and the least I can ask for is a thumbs up on the video, as those help the analytics and show this potentially to more people, which again helps grow the channel. So thank you for doing whatever you can at the end of the day. Let's begin by talking about Faye. Now with Faye, this one may not be as interesting of a video, especially if you don't use Faye or may not want to use Faye, but even if you watch this through, maybe you'll learn something about Faye, and here I am to provide that analysis and perspective for you. So Faye's Resplendent is, I believe, an Emblem type outfit. I'm okay with this. I think the colors match her quite well. I don't have too strong an opinion on this. I just think as long as the artist puts in the effort and the work, that's what matters. And for me, the detail looks nice. And yeah, even got great expressions, great effects, great art overall. That's my take on this one. But yeah, let's get into the meat of today's video, which is obviously how she stands in today's day. So I'm going to start off with some comparisons, and I'm also going to show the pros and cons below me of what I think of Faye. Now, first of all, if you actually look at some of the stats of Faye compared to more recent archers, you'll see she's actually fallen behind quite a bit. While you can treat this video as just a Faye analysis in general, Resplendent does matter quite a bit to keep Faye competitive. In fact, she's on the lower end, and because she's such an old unit, even having training stats, she can't really compete with some of the more F2P options. Even Norn at 168 BST is still the tanky option, while Innis at 171, being a more recent release, is at pretty much 171. So even with Resplendent, Faye only gets to get close to these at 164. I would say the thing that makes her potentially stand out the most is her weapon, her preference weapon. This is a great distinguisher to help her stand out for something like Norn and provide some contrast with someone like Innis. If you look at the second piece here. Just giving Faye her resplendent bumps her up very close to Norn in terms of stats, outclasses Alm, at least defensively of course, and puts her pretty close to Innis as well. So the resplendent is more reliant here. If you were to use Faye competitively, then really, this is one of the few times where resplendent will matter quite a bit to make her more competitive. However, her bow does even stand out by today's standards. Having QR built into the bow is pretty nice. The condition being 50% is not unreasonable, and as long as she's tanking ranged type stuff, she gets a bonus to 4 to all stats. So there's a couple of ways that I would recommend, of course, using Faye, but being a 5-star exclusive, and having Fire Sweep Bow still be 5-star locked to Faye does mean that there's not likely to be many of you who do invest into Faye with merges and flowers, which will serve as kind of a necessity to make her as competitive as someone like Norn Innis. One thing I didn't even mention is, of course, that, well, when looking at the comparison between the three over here, you'll see that Faye is pretty close to someone like Norn, because Norn also had trainee stats and was released a bit later, and Norn will be due for a weapon refine, maybe not too soon, but eventually, and that could put Norn to completely outclass someone like Faye, unfortunately. If you just wanted the more offensive archer, you'll see that Innis just straight up outclasses both Norn and Faye, and then when you factor in his preference bow and that damage reduction piercing type effect, Innis is just by far the best option FTP wise to get yourself a good unit. And Faye isn't even really an FTP option, so I can't really recommend her over someone like Norn, but if you just happen to have many copies lying around, no use for Fire Sweep Bow, and maybe she's just one of your favorite characters, then that's what this video is for. Hopefully provide some perspective. You don't necessarily have to bring these characters to +10 to use them well, but when you're talking about tanky type units like Faye, it really does make a difference for using stuff like the Resplendent and obviously the flowers and merges and whatnot. So this is a hard sell, but it is still something worth talking about at the end of the day. So looking at her stats, of course, considering the Resplendent, you see it's quite middling all over the place, but that's potentially a good thing because though tanks do appreciate pretty much all stats, so by having Faye just having middling stats all over, she's going to be quite good as a tank unit. Actually having high HP is also an additional boon, as that means that stuff like damage reduction does work in HP's favor. The more HP you have, the better benefit of having that HP stat. So partners like Elamine or Flame, or even that new Speed Smoke 4 are all going to be things to consider. Now, as I mentioned earlier, she is unfortunately still the only unit that has Fire Sweep Bow. That may change in the future, but if you have strategies that revolve around Fire Sweep Bow, let's say on air defense with a Cav that uses Fire Sweep Bow with, let's say, double Poison Strike, then it'll be pretty hard to pretty much merge her up, and that is the reality of probably many Faye users. Going back to stat comparisons and providing you guys with some sample builds, I think if you're going to use Faye, it's going to be in one of these. Again, I'm showing the max potential of the unit. Don't feel compelled to have +10 before you can literally use Faye. Many of you might be able to do with the mid-merge Faye and still get by pretty well. So honestly, in her best role, I would say she's best as a range tank covered with near save. That will really help out her weapon, as the weapon does depend mostly on ranged hitting her to get that 4 to all stats, and that 4 to all stats will help her as a tank, especially to make her stand out compared to someone like Norn, of course. I do think using a Unity skill is the right decision, as a Unity skill will prevent her from getting hit by the chills and the shrines and such, with her stats being as high as they are. So using a Unity reverses those type of effects. Null follow-up is actually quite synergistic with quick riposte. If you don't really understand how that interaction works, essentially if an enemy has, let's say, an impact effect which would deny her QR, let's say, it mostly comes down to a speed check. So if you ran into an enemy that uses an impact and Faye has QR in her weapon, but she doesn't have null follow-up, that effectively becomes a speed check, as those two skills cancel themselves out. Now, if an enemy has an impact effect and Faye is using null follow-up, what that means is that Faye will 100% have her QR active and will always double regardless of her speed stat. The only scenario where that doesn't apply is if the enemy also has null follow-up. And on defense and most nukers, you don't usually find it too often, so null follow-up is quite good with quick riposte, as her speed stat will become less important, and the biggest counter to her is effectively going to be enemies with null follow-up. but no follow-up with QR ends up being pretty solid. I do think it's one of her better B skills, and her speed isn't as important. You'd pretty much be using her speed to deny enemy doubles in best case scenarios. Now, I do think both of the new smoke skills work well on these type of tanks. The attack smoke 4, in my opinion, is going to be a bit better, as again, you deny that enemy double, so you're not relying on that speed stat as much for someone like Faye. Bulking her defense and res as much as possible, relying on Ruptured Sky and QR to get the kills. Again, I do think this will make a solid tank if you wanted to use her this way. And as I said, merges and resplendent do make a difference, but they won't be necessary for you to succeed. Now, another way you can do it is because Caden now officially exists with his refine, it is quite competitive to consider basically Caden as a great addition to a lot of Omni tanks, and Faye works pretty well as an Omni tank. An Omni tank is somebody who doesn't rely on the saves to cover them, and they use something like close counter, close reversal, distant counter, distant storm, whatever, those ones that let a tank cover every single type of matchup. So Omni tanks, in my opinion, work a bit better now because of Caden, and the reason this is the way it is because Caden provides a guard effect. Guard effects are really good on tanks because they stop specials from activating on the enemy. A lot of, like, let's say 1-charge specials or 2-charge specials will just not happen, especially against, let's say, a Bridal Catria team where they rely on those specials charging. Caden makes a good partner for those scenarios, and therefore I do think an Omni tank type scenario is good. You don't have to necessarily always use Caden, but he's going to be a great partner for those type of strats. You can combine him in save teams and even use him that way as well. As I mentioned earlier, Flame and damage reduction and stuff like Elemine also work as great partners. But if you do use, let's say, Speed Smoke 4, you don't necessarily depend or need stuff like Elemine or Flame. The smokes can be a bit awkward too, as they require an engagement before you've activated the dodge, or you have to splash the kind of deny auto double type effect or speed type doubles in general. So again, Faye is pretty good, I'd say, in these type of roles. If you do use the one with like Speed Smoke 4, then you are going to be trying to push the speed a little bit to take advantage of the damage reduction. Range units in general didn't have access to stuff like dodge, so that's great that you can actually run these sort of builds and revives these older type characters such as Faye. Finally, believe it or not, all the F2P options and pretty much all the archers in general all compete as a C-Dual Infantry 4 option, and Faye acts as pretty well into fitting these roles if you wanted to use her in Arena as a C-Dual Infantry 4 option. So in Arena, because of her massive amount of bulk, you could potentially use her, and high HP, could use her to do stuff like Infantry Pulse, Infantry Rush, Infantry Breath even. There's plenty of infantry synergy that somebody like Faye might have and could make a good addition to an arena team if you happen to have her merged up. Her stat spread lets her handle a great range of enemy threats that I think makes her at least a solid candidate to consider. I'd say she's better there than, let's say, Norn, while Innis might have more offensive type pressure. With that being said, folks, this basically covers my full analysis on Faye. Again, the Resplendent helps quite a bit for someone like Faye, but is not necessary, and if you wanted to use Faye, you can definitely have a chance to succeed. That's all, but in the next one, I will be covering Gaius as well, so look forward to that coming very soon, and likely a calendar video, plus a couple other things, such as a unit review video as well, and some commentary. That's the videos to come. Hope you enjoyed this one as always. Smash the like button if you haven't already, and sub, please. See you in the next one, folks. Love you all.